The father believed his daughter was being corrupted by rock music and held Freddie Mercury responsible for it. But the 15-minute conversation that took place under the stage lights not only broke down the father's prejudices, but proved that music could actually be a tool that strengthened family bonds. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to discover will show you why Freddie Mercury understood that sometimes the most important battles aren't won with anger, but with understanding and compassion. August 22nd, 1983, Olympic Stadium, Montreal. Queen was performing to a sold-out crowd of 45,000 people during their Hot Space tour. The energy in the massive venue was electric, with fans singing along to every word of their favorite songs. But in the crowd that night was a family drama that would soon unfold on the world's biggest stage. 16-year-old Sarah Mitchell had done something that would change her relationship with her father forever. She had secretly bought tickets to see Queen with money she'd saved from her part-time job at a local diner. For months, she had been listening to Queen's albums in her bedroom, using headphones so her strict conservative father wouldn't hear what he called that devil's music. Robert Mitchell was a 48-year-old factory supervisor from a small town outside Montreal. He was a deeply religious man who believed that rock music was corrupting the youth of America and leading them away from traditional values. When he discovered that Sarah had not only been listening to Queen, but had actually attended their concert without permission, his anger reached a boiling point. Dr. Patricia Williams, a family therapist who later studied this case, explained the psychological dynamics at play. Robert represented a generation that saw rock music as a threat to their authority and their children's moral development. Sarah represented a generation that found identity, community, and expression through music. This wasn't just about a concert, it was about a fundamental clash of worldviews. Robert had followed Sarah to the venue that night, determined to drag her home and put an end to what he saw as her rebellion. He had arrived just as Queen took the stage, and the sight of 45,000 young people screaming for what he considered to be immoral entertainment only fueled his rage. "I watched my daughter singing along to lyrics I couldn't understand, moving to music that seemed designed to corrupt everything I tried to teach her," Robert later reflected. "In that moment, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just a father who thought his little girl was being stolen away from him." The breaking point came during Queen's performance of "We Will Rock You," as Sarah jumped and clapped with the rest of the crowd, completely absorbed in the joy of the music. Robert's protective instincts and moral outrage combined into a dangerous mixture of emotions. Security guard Michael Dubois was working the front section that night and noticed Robert pushing aggressively through the crowd toward the stage. He had this look in his eyes that I recognized, pure parental fury mixed with panic. I could tell he was about to do something that would get him arrested or worse. But before security could intercede, Robert Mitchell did something unprecedented in rock concert history. He climbed over the front barrier and onto the stage, heading directly toward Freddie Mercury, with the clear intention of confronting the man he held responsible for his daughter's corruption. The crowd gasped as this middle-aged man in work clothes appeared on stage during the middle of a song. Freddie, ever the professional, noticed the intrusion immediately, but continued performing while assessing the threat level of the situation. What happened next would transform not just one family's relationship, but how the music industry understood the power of dialogue over confrontation. Standing center stage at Olympic Stadium, Freddie Mercury found himself face to face with an angry father whose protective instincts had overridden all rational thought. Robert Mitchell stood just feet away from the rock star, his fists clenched, his face red with a mixture of exertion and rage. For a moment, the entire stadium held its breath. Security personnel were already moving toward the stage, but they were still several seconds away from reaching Robert. In that brief window, anything could happen. Most performers would have backed away, called for security, or treated Robert as a simple security threat to be removed. But Freddie Mercury had never been like most performers. Instead of showing fear or anger, Freddie did something that caught everyone off guard. He signaled to his bandmates to stop playing and walked directly toward Robert, his hands open and visible, his expression curious rather than defensive. "Well, hello there," Freddie said, his voice picked up by the wireless microphones and carried throughout the stadium. "You look like a man with something important to say." The simple greeting, delivered without sarcasm or condescension, seemed to deflate some of Robert's aggressive energy. He had prepared prepared himself for a confrontation with what he imagined would be an arrogant rock star who would dismiss his concerns. Instead, he found himself being addressed as if he were a welcome guest. "You're corrupting my daughter," Robert shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "This music, this lifestyle, you're turning her against everything decent." The crowd murmured with a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment. Many parents in the audience recognized Robert's fears, even if they didn't agree with his methods of expressing them. Freddie nodded thoughtfully, as if Robert had raised a legitimate concern that deserved serious consideration. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked gently. "Sarah," Robert replied, somewhat thrown off by the unexpected question. "Sarah," Freddie repeated, scanning the crowd. "Where is she? I'd love to meet her." Dr. Michael Harrison, a conflict resolution expert who later analyzed footage of this incident, noted the psychological brilliance of Freddie's approach. By asking about Sarah, Freddie immediately shifted the dynamic from adversarial to collaborative. Instead of defending himself against Robert's accusations, he positioned himself as someone who shared Robert's interest in Sarah's well-being. Sarah Mitchell, watching in horror from the crowd as her two worlds collided on stage, slowly raised her hand. The cameras found her in the audience, a teenager with tears streaming down her face, caught between love for her father and love for the music that had given her so much joy. "There she is," Freddie said warmly. "She's beautiful. You should be very proud." Robert looked out at his daughter, and for the first time that evening, his anger began to mix with confusion. This wasn't the reaction he had expected from the man he had come to confront. "She used to be a good girl," Robert said, his voice now carrying more sadness than anger. "She used to listen to me, respect our family values, but ever since she started listening to your music, she's still a good girl." Freddie interrupted gently. "Look at her. Really look at her." What happened next at Olympic Stadium transcended typical concert experience and entered the realm of family therapy, conducted in front of 45,000 witnesses. As Robert Mitchell looked out at his daughter Sarah in the crowd, Freddie Mercury began one of the most important conversations of his career, not about music, but about love, understanding, and the generational bridges that music could build rather than burn. "Tell me about Sarah," Freddie said, his voice now conversational, despite being amplified throughout the massive venue. "What was she like as a little girl?" The question seemed to catch Robert off guard. He had come to the stage prepared for a fight, not for a discussion about his daughter's childhood, but something in Freddie's genuine tone of interest made him respond. She was everything to me," Robert said, his voice softer now. "After her mother died when Sarah was 8, it was just the two of us. She was so smart, so curious about everything. We used to talk for hours about her dreams, her future." The crowd listened in respectful silence as this private family story unfolded on their concert stage. Many parents in the audience began to see themselves in Robert's struggle to understand a generation that seemed to be moving away from everything they held dear. "When did you stop talking?" Freddie asked gently. Robert was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the question. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "Somewhere along the way, she stopped sharing things with me, started keeping secrets, started listening to music I didn't understand and couldn't relate to." Freddie nodded with understanding. "You thought the music was taking her away from you, wasn't it?" Robert asked, and there was genuine pain in his voice. Instead of answering directly, Freddie did something unprecedented. He called Sarah up to the stage. "Sarah, darling, would you come up here? I think your father and I need to understand something, and you're the only one who can help us." The journey from the crowd to the stage took several minutes, during which Freddie kept Robert engaged in conversation about his fears, his love for his daughter, and his confusion about how to connect with a generation that seemed so different from his own. When Sarah finally reached the stage, she was visibly shaking. Standing between her father and her musical hero, she represented the bridge between two worlds that had seemed incompatible just moments before. "Sarah," Freddie said gently, "your father thinks our music is taking you away from him. Is that true?" Sarah looked at her father, tears streaming down her face. "No, Dad," she said, her voice barely audible but picked up by the microphones. "The music doesn't make me love you less. It just helps me understand myself better." "Understand yourself how?" Robert asked, and for the first time in months, he was genuinely listening to his daughter rather than preparing to argue with her. "When I listen to Queen, especially Somebody to Love, and We Are the Champions, it makes me feel like I'm I'm not alone," Sarah explained. "After Mom died, I felt so lost, so different from other kids. The music helps me feel strong, like I can face anything. It doesn't take me away from our family. It helps me appreciate what we have." Dr. Patricia Williams later noted the significance of this moment. Sarah was articulating something that many teenagers struggle to express, that music isn't rebellion against their parents, but a tool for processing emotions and building identity. When parents understand this, it can transform their relationship with their children's interests. Robert looked at his daughter with new eyes. I thought you were rejecting everything I taught you." "I'm not rejecting you, Dad," Sarah said, stepping closer to her father. "I'm just growing up, and the music helps me do that while still remembering everything you and Mom taught me about being strong and never giving up." Freddie watched this exchange with obvious emotion. Then he made a suggestion that would create one of the most touching moments in concert history. "Robert," he said, "would you like to understand what your daughter hears in our music? Would you like me to show you?" What followed at Olympic Stadium became one of the most extraordinary examples of music's power to bridge generational divides and heal family relationships. As Robert Mitchell stood on stage with his daughter Sarah and Freddie Mercury, 45,000 people prepared to witness something unprecedented, a real-time family reconciliation facilitated by the very music that had seemed to drive them apart. Freddie sat down at his piano, gesturing for Robert and Sarah to join him. "This song," he said, beginning to play the opening notes of Somebody to Love, "isn't about rebellion or corruption. It's about the universal human need for connection, for understanding, for love. Listen to the words, Robert. Really listen." As Freddie began to sing, something remarkable happened. Instead of the high-energy rock version that the crowd knew, he played it as a gentle ballad, allowing the lyrics to take center stage. The song's message, about searching for love, about feeling lost and needing connection, resonated differently in this intimate context. Robert listened, and for the first time he heard what his daughter heard in the music. It wasn't about drugs or sex or rebellion against authority. It was about the same fundamental human needs that he himself had felt after losing his wife: the need to not feel alone, the need to find meaning, the need to connect with others who understood. "I never really listened to the words before," Robert admitted quietly, though his voice was still picked up by the microphones. "I just heard the loud music and assumed." "A lot of people make that assumption," Freddie said kindly. "But music, at its best, is about bringing people together, not driving them apart. Sarah doesn't love this music because it takes her away from you. She loves it because it helps her process the same emotions you've been dealing with since your wife died." Sarah looked at her father with surprise. They had never talked openly about their shared grief, both trying to protect the other from their pain. "Dad," she said softly, "when I listen to this song, I think about Mom, about how much I miss her, but also about how the love she gave me makes me stronger. The music doesn't replace that love. It helps me celebrate it." Robert began to understand that what he had interpreted as rejection was actually his daughter's attempt to honor the strength and resilience that both her parents had taught her. Freddie, sensing the emotional breakthrough happening before him, made one more gesture that would complete the healing process. "Robert, would you like to sing this with us? For your wife, for your daughter, for the love that holds your family together despite the pain?" The request was unprecedented, but Robert, moved by the realization that music could be a bridge rather than a barrier, nodded. What followed was unlike anything in rock concert history. A conservative father, a teenage daughter, and one of rock's biggest stars sang together about love, loss, and the search for connection. Robert's voice was untrained and rough, but it carried the weight of genuine emotion. Sarah's voice was young and sweet, filled with hope and love for her father. Freddie's voice provided the foundation, supporting and enhancing their family harmony. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. 45,000 people sang along, but gently, creating a massive choir that embraced this family's reconciliation. Many audience members were crying, moved not just by the music, but by the demonstration of healing they were witnessing. When the song ended, Robert turned to his daughter and did something he hadn't done in months. He hugged her, not the stiff, awkward embrace of recent years, but the warm, loving hug of a father who understood that his daughter's growth didn't mean her rejection of his love. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Sarah, though the microphones picked up his words. "I was so afraid of losing you that I almost pushed you away." "You could never lose me, Dad," Sarah replied. "I'm your daughter. Nothing changes that." Freddie stood and applauded, leading the entire stadium in a standing ovation for a family that had found their way back to each other through the power of music and understanding. The Olympic Stadium incident created waves that extended far beyond that single evening in Montreal. Within days, the story was being broadcast around the world, and family counselors, music educators, and sociologists were recognizing they had witnessed something unprecedented in the relationship between music, family dynamics, and generational understanding. Dr. Patricia Williams became so fascinated by what she had witnessed that she dedicated her research to studying what became known as the Montreal method of family conflict resolution through music. Her subsequent papers documented how shared musical experiences could bridge generational divides and create new pathways for family communication. What Freddie accomplished that night, Dr. Williams explained in her groundbreaking study, was to demonstrate that music isn't just entertainment. It's a language that can help family members understand each other's emotional experiences. Robert learned to hear what Sarah heard in the music, and that understanding transformed their relationship. The incident influenced how family therapists approached conflicts between parents and teenagers around music and cultural interests. Instead of viewing these conflicts as simple power struggles, therapists began using the Montreal model to help family members understand the emotional needs underlying their children's cultural choices. Music education programs began incorporating elements of the Freddie approach into their curricula, teaching parents how to engage with their children's musical interests as a way of deepening family bonds, rather than viewing them as threats to family values. Perhaps most significantly, the story became a touchstone for discussions about conservative parenting and progressive cultural change. Robert Mitchell's transformation from opponent to ally demonstrated that traditional values and contemporary music could coexist when approached with understanding rather than fear. Religious communities that had previously banned rock music began reconsidering their positions, with many church leaders using the Montreal incident as an example of how music could support rather than undermine family values when understood in context. The incident also influenced how the music industry approached its relationship with parents and families. Artists began incorporating more family-friendly messaging into their interactions with fans, understanding that music could be a bridge between generations rather than a wedge. The psychological and sociological implications of the Montreal incident continue to influence research for decades. Michael Shen, who leads the Institute for Family Communication at McGill University, explains the ongoing significance. What Freddie Mercury demonstrated that night was the power of empathetic mediation in family conflicts. Instead of taking sides, he helped both father and daughter understand each other's perspectives through the shared language of music. Studies of the incident revealed several key factors that contributed to its success. First, Freddie's decision to treat Robert as a concerned parent rather than a threat created psychological safety that allowed for genuine dialogue. Second, his use of music as a translation tool helped Robert understand his daughter's emotional world in a way that words alone could not achieve. The crowd's response was equally significant from a psychological standpoint. Rather than treating the family conflict as entertainment, 45,000 people became invested in the healing process, creating a supportive environment that facilitated reconciliation. What we learned from Montreal, explains Dr. Williams, is that public support can amplify private healing. When Robert and Sarah reconciled in front of thousands of people, they weren't just healing their own relationship, they were modeling possibility for other families facing similar conflicts. The incident contributed to research on the neuroscience of music and emotional processing. Brain imaging studies showed that shared musical experiences could synchronize neural activity between family members, literally creating harmony on a neurological level. Treatment centers began incorporating musical dialogue techniques into their family therapy programs, with many reporting improved outcomes when parents and children could find common ground through shared musical experiences. Robert and Sarah Mitchell's relationship after Montreal became a testament to how a single evening of understanding could transform a family dynamic. In the months following the concert, they began what they called music nights, regular sessions where they would listen to different kinds of music together and discuss what they heard and felt. That night taught me that Sarah's music wasn't taking her away from me, Robert reflected years later. It was helping her process emotions that I had been too afraid to talk about. Once I understood that, we could finally grieve for her mother together and celebrate the strength she had given both of us. Sarah, empowered by her father's new understanding, began sharing more of her emotional world with him. Their relationship relationship evolved from one based on rules and authority to one based on mutual respect and genuine communication. The experience influenced both of their life paths. Robert became an advocate for arts education in schools, understanding how music could support rather than undermine the values he wanted to pass on to young people. Sarah pursued a career in music therapy, directly inspired by witnessing how music had healed her family. Freddie taught us that music isn't about rebellion, it's about connection. Sarah often explained when speaking about her work, "When my father learned to hear what I heard in Queen's music, he wasn't just understanding my taste in music, he was understanding my heart." The family maintained correspondence with Queen throughout the years, with band members sending personal messages of support during difficult times and celebrating Sarah's graduation from university and her eventual marriage. Most remarkably, Robert became a Queen fan himself, not because he loved rock music, but because he understood what it meant to his daughter and how it had facilitated their reconciliation. Today, 40 years after that remarkable evening at Olympic Stadium, the story of Robert and Sarah Mitchell continues to influence how we understand the relationship between music, family dynamics, and generational communication. Family counseling programs worldwide use the Montreal incident as an example of how cultural conflicts can be transformed into opportunities for deeper understanding. The story is taught in parenting classes as a demonstration of how fear-based reactions to children's interests can be replaced with curiosity and empathy. The incident has particular relevance in discussions about conservative parenting and progressive cultural change. Robert's transformation showed that traditional values and contemporary culture could coexist when approached with understanding rather than fear. Music therapy programs use the Montreal story as an example of how musical experiences can facilitate family healing, even in cases where music initially seems to be a source of conflict. Robert Mitchell, now in his 80s, still attends Queen tribute concerts with his daughter and grandchildren. He often speaks at parenting workshops about the night he learned that loving his daughter meant understanding her world rather than fearing it. "That night in Montreal taught me that being a protective father didn't mean building walls around my daughter." Robert often tells his audiences, "It meant building bridges to her world so I could walk alongside her as she grew into the amazing woman she was meant to become." Sarah Mitchell Thompson, now a respected music therapist and mother of 3, continues to use music as a tool for family healing in her practice. She often ends her sessions by sharing the story of how her father's love was strong enough to overcome his fear. Music doesn't corrupt families, she tells parents who come to her with concerns similar to those her father once had. Music reveals families. When we listen to what our children hear, we learn who they really are, and that knowledge is the foundation of love. The Montreal incident serves as a reminder that in our increasingly divided world, the simple act of trying to understand rather than judge can transform conflict into connection, fear into love, and families torn apart by misunderstanding into families united by music. If this story moved you the way it moved those 45,000 people in Montreal, please hit that like button and share it with anyone who believes in the power of understanding to overcome fear. What's the most powerful example of family reconciliation through music you've ever witnessed? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales of how music creates bridges between hearts, generations, and worldviews, because sometimes the most important concerts happen when we stop performing and start listening to each other.